Nobody likes a liar. And interestingly, lying is very strongly selected against in human culture. We shun liars, we imprison them, we do all sorts of things, and it's because it's detrimental to the integrity of human communities. And so anything that is detrimental to the integrity of a community has over time been strongly selected against. But of course, liars are very crafty, they adapt very rapidly, they spin new tales. And of course, that means that, according to natural selection, there are forces here in dynamic opposition. There are people who are trying to know the truth, to get to the truth about anything, and there are people who are trying to obfuscate or lie or confuse or whatever it might be. And this is a struggle that we've engaged in throughout prehistory and throughout history. And it's been pointed out earlier, you can take a well-crafted lie and make people believe it's true if you can get it disseminated widely enough. You know, if you can get enough people to believe something, lies are a bit like Tinkerbell. You clap your hands, you throw your own personal mana behind it, and a lie can be seen as being true. And of course, this gets radically easier with the invention of the mass media. The broadsheet newspaper, as we know it today, comes out of Great Britain in the late 17th century during the most tumultuous years of Charles II, when the two sort of emerging political parties, the Whigs and the Tories, were fighting it out by saying the most horrific things about each other in print, the King and James II and all these different things. So propaganda in the modern sense begins with newspapers. Now, very contentiously, although I think it can be argued very accurately, McLuhan tied the rise of Hitler to the public address system and to radio broadcasting. And if you take a look at the 1920s and the 1930s, you see a lot of demagogues. You see Hitler, you see Mussolini, who was what before he was dictator? A newspaperman, all right? You see Huey Long in America. You see Father Coughlin, whom you probably remember his broadcasts from the 30s, yeah? You do, all right. Father Coughlin, for those of you who don't know, was a vociferously anti-Semitic American Irish Catholic priest who had a great big radio following. And lies and propaganda, when amplified by the mass media, reach millions of people basically in a single moment. So they can convince them of anything, buy toothpaste, hate the Jews, invade Poland, whatever it might be. And of course, there were always some people who were capable of resisting those voices. But those resistors did not have access to the mass media. It was really too powerful to be left in the hands of the masses. So radio and television licenses, which is specifically how that control has worked out, has always remained in the hands of power elites. And the power elites tailored a particular worldview that they wanted the population to absorb as truth, disseminated that worldview. And when those worldviews came into conflict, which they did periodically, you get the Second World War. You have one particular set of worldviews coming out of Central Europe, another set coming out of the West. They're going to fight about it, and it's going to have that accelerated process of natural selection that you get during wars that we talked about the other day. But of course, that all took, 50 years, and you get the Second World War that ends, the Cold War, and that ends. And then you have the end of history period, as proclaimed by Francis Fukuyama. And you have another conflict that had been going on underneath all this sort of meta-conflict between East and West, which starts to bubble up. And it's that there was a war between power elites and the insurgent forces who were trying to get to the truths behind the power elites. And, you don't need to listen to me on this, just go read Noam Chomsky. Probably any book will do. But Noam Chomsky has gone into this enormously. You can buy a copy of the Daily Worker on a street corner in New York, or you can read, Harper's or Foreign Affairs and National Review. But the interesting thing is the more mainstream a publication is, the more likely it is to represent a mainstream, mass-marketed, mass-mind point of view. And that's particularly true in the late 20th and early 21st centuries because the power elites had literally purchased all of those outlets. So you have now, 4 or 5 corporations in the United States and really most of the rest of the world. And you can blame me for that because, let's face it, Rupert Murdoch came out of Australia. So you have this very tight concentration of fact and truth-telling and power. But again, I want to come back to something because it's an important point. You cannot represent lies as truth indefinitely. You cannot do it because the entire world, whether it's natural or human, is constantly selecting against it. So in order to stay up, the lies have to get stealthier, you have to find new ways of telling them, you have to get craftier about it. But really, just the same, all along, and just as inexorably, people are using more finely crafted techniques. They're selecting techniques that are more finely crafted at getting at the truth. And so this is a direct corollary of the theorem about violence that I made on Thursday night. And when I said that violence only breeds those capable of resisting it, lying only breeds those capable of discerning the truth. And that's why you get, for instance, investigative journalists, and blue ribbon commissions, and special prosecutors, and these are the forms that the system itself is generating in order to sort of rein its own excesses in. But things have changed, and they've changed recently. And they've changed enormously. And I've done a lot of examining about what this change is and why this change happened. And this change has happened in the United States, and it has not yet happened in Australia. And I've talked to a lot of people in the media and on the internet in Australia to figure out why things are different in America than they are in Australia. Well, it turns out for this change to happen, there had to be an inciting incident. And the inciting incident was the invasion of Iraq. Because the run-up to the war, and really in the early aftermath of the war, there was, we now understand and is generally acknowledged, a broad, general failure of the mass media to discern truth from lies. And because the lies were very carefully crafted, very carefully spread by the Bush administration, I believed the lies. Why did I believe the lies? Because I was reading Judy Miller in the New York Times. All right, my mistake, mea culpa, all right? I've gone onto daily coughs and confessed. I've done my penance, all right? But I believe the lies. Now, in that single act, the credibility of all mass news organizations, specifically in America, was cast into doubt, all right? Not only did the government lie, but the Fourth Estate, which is charged, which has as its primary function the ability to detect and to expose those lies, it failed in absolutely every aspect. Or worse, it colluded in propagating the lie because to do otherwise would be seen as unpatriotic. And there are documented cases of that as well. So, suddenly, tens of millions, maybe not, 200 million, but tens of millions of Americans completely lost their trust in mainstream news outlets, things that they were relying on to tell them the truth about their world. And so the press, because it had been caught up in a lie, the mainstream press was strongly selected against. And I think we're going to see it's never, ever going to regain that trust because the failure was too general and the failure was too widespread. And because that created the opening, the ecological niche for other forms which are better suited, more finely selected for the current environment, to be selected for in the wake of that catastrophic failure. Now, political blogging had existed before the run-up to the Iraq War, but it was in that time and the period thereafter through now that it began its absolutely meteoric rise.